I think the combined is about 10 or 11 million. But social contract. But it's going to be a hammer.
Let the record reflect, we have reconvened with all members present. Could I have the Patriotic Celebrations Committee please come forward to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Please rise. Don't go too far. We'll call you back up a little bit, Doc. All right, may I have a motion for the executive minutes of January 28th and February 9th?
So moved.
Second.
We already had council discussion. Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
And a motion for the regular minutes of January 28th, 2015.
So moved.
Second.
Any council discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
All right, a motion for the regular minutes of February 9th, 2015.
So moved.
Second.
Any council discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming out on such a beautiful evening. I've asked the police chief to please go out and protect the groundhog because he is in danger. That's all I can tell you that right now. We are tired of this. A couple announcements before we get to proclamations. Just a reminder that Wednesday night, the 25th, 7 p.m. at Madison High School, the Pilgrim Pipeline Community Meeting. It has been listed periodically called a rally. This is not a rally. This is a community meeting. Provide information about where that stands and what could be happening with it. We'll have representation from the state legislation and also attorneys with expertise in the environmental law to help us out understand the challenges with the Pilgrim Pipeline. From the library is working in conjunction with other Morris County public libraries offering a new ebook service. We are now using 3M as their vendor, and library patrons report that it's easy access to download audio and ebooks. Further information is available at the library's website or by calling the information desk. And on Saturday, March 7th, the Friends of the Library will be holding their annual gala at the library. Tickets are still available. This year, the Friends will be celebrating the Rotary Club of Madison for their generous contribution of volunteer time and grant funding. Join the Friends for an evening of good time, great food, and a chance to participate in a 50-50 raffle. And also, March is Women's History Month, and the library will be celebrating with a presentation on aviator Bessie Coleman on March 8th and showing the film Top Secret Rosies on March 11th. Gail Stein, please come forward. Just in case you thought your brains had finally frozen over, yes, as we do have the Cat in the Hat join us today. March 2nd is a very special day. Read across America. Whereas the citizens of the Borough of Madison stand firmly committed by promoting reading as the catalyst for our students' future academic success, the preparation for America's jobs of the future, and for the ability to compete in the global economy. And whereas Madison has provided significant leadership in the area of community involvement and education of our youth, grounded in the principle that educational investment is the key to the community's well-being and long-term quality of life. And whereas NEA's Read Across America, a national celebration of reading, will be conducted on March 2nd, 2015, on the day that would have been the 111th birthday of Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss. But wait, there's more. I've got more. Yes, and I have more reading to do. Whereas Read Across America NJ is being conducted statewide by New Jersey Education Association in partnership with the New Jersey State League of Municipalities, New Jersey Library Association, and their local affiliates across the state to promote reading and adult involvement in the education of communities' students. Now, therefore, I, Robert H. Conley, Mayor of the Borough of Madison, on behalf of the governing body, call on the citizens of Madison to assure that every child is in a safe place reading together with a caring adult on March 2nd, 2015. Further, we enthusiastically endorse NEA's Read Across America and Read Across America NJ and recommit to our community to engage in programs and activities to make America's children the best readers in the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So my name is Gail Stein. I'm the Library Media Specialist at Central Avenue School. I may look familiar. I have the pleasure of coming here every year. This year I was especially happy to put on my cat suit. Keeps me really warm, 14 degrees out. So thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for having us. And remember that books are brain food.
And can I have the Patriotic Celebrations, can we back up here again? Slide around a little bit so we can get, don't want to miss you on camera there. We've been recognizing the great work of the volunteers in Madison, and this group here has worked quietly behind the scenes, but for an excellent purpose. Regretfully, in towns across this country, the last Monday in May is thought to be the unofficial start of summer, the opening of the pools, and a time for picnics, and they've forgotten what the true meaning of Memorial Day is. This group of dedicated volunteers have made sure that Madison never forgets, and our adults and our children are educated about the people that have sacrificed their lives for our country and for our freedom. So on behalf of the borough, I have this proclamation. Whereas the Patriotic Celebrations Committee is a long-standing committee in the Borough of Madison responsible for organizing and coordinating the Memorial Day Parade and commemorative ceremony that follows on the steps of Hartley Dodge Memorial. And whereas Memorial Day was originally called Decoration Day and was first celebrated on May 30th, 1868 in honor of the soldiers of the Union and Confederate armies who died during the American Civil War. And whereas by the late 19th century, the holiday became known as Memorial Day and was expanded to include the deceased veterans of all wars fought by American forces, becoming a federal holiday in 1971 to be celebrated last Monday in May. And whereas, so that residents of Madison will never forget those who have served our country, the members of the Patriotic Celebration Committee are dedicated to honoring local veterans of all wars and have produced the Wall of Honor, which is on display of a display of restored old photographs of Madison military personnel who have given their lives in battle in our service for their country. And whereas the Wall of Honor is a tribute that can be viewed during the Memorial Day Parade and remembrance ceremony. Whereas when veterans returned to civilian life after World War II, there was housing shortage. So the Borough of Madison set up temporary housing development for veterans constructed of 20 prefabricated homes located on land opposite the Lucy D. Anthony School. And whereas a current initiative of the Patriotic Celebrations Committee is installation of a flagpole and plaque on the site of the World War II Veterans Temporary Housing Development, which later became a playground for the Lucy D. Anthony School. Now, therefore, I, Robert H. Conley, Mayor of Borough of Madison, on behalf of the governing body, hereby extend thanks and appreciation for the members of the Patriotic Celebration Committee for their efforts, dedication, and commitment to the veterans of the Borough of Madison. Thank you for everything you do. And I know you're a quiet group, but if you could just, if I'm going to hand you the microphone, just introduce yourself because you truly do a great service to the Borough of Madison.
Ron DiBiase, co-chairman.
Pat Sherwood.
Michael Piano. Vic Schumacher.
Tom Granado.
Jeff Pettit.
Wayne Henderson.
Can I say anything as co-chair?
Yes. On our flag initiative, or our flagpole initiative for that field down by Lucy D'Anthony, anybody who was associated with that project in the very beginning, any of the veterans who may have lived there and are still in Madison, or their families, we'd like to hear from you. It's difficult in order to communicate, but I understand if you go on RoseNet and you go into contact us and you leave a message and you explain what you want, it may get to our Patriotic Celebration Committee. By doing that, then we'll have a little bit better information and we'll be able to put some of that on the plaque. And we look forward to it. We also have a lot of people volunteering their services to help us get the plaques and the flagpole set up. So if you want to volunteer services, just let us know. Thank you.
Coming out. Thank you for all you do. Okay. Reports from committees, community affairs, Ms. Bailey.
Thank you, Mayor. The DDC, the Downtown Development Commission, has just completed the first phase of its strategic planning process. And they are adding a new committee, marketing/branding committee. Their parking and redevelopment committee will now be folded into the new public improvement committee. And they will continue to have university relations and sign and facade. The DDC voted unanimously to approve the addition of MACA representative to membership. This will be a voting member position. The DDC has asked University Relations Committee to further investigate how to incorporate student representation from our local universities, including Drew, Fairleigh, and St. Elizabeth's. The DDC and the Madison area YMCA are teaming up to host the first annual Madison Downtown Scavenger Hunt on Saturday, March 21st. This event will support downtown Madison and benefit the Madison area YMCA's Community Mental Health Initiative. The link for registration forms can be found on the DDC's webpage on RoseNet. This year, Taste of Madison will be held on Monday, March 30th at Park Avenue Club. Tickets may be purchased at www.tasteofmadison.org. This event is organized through a partnership between the DDC, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Rotary Club. And we don't want to forget to put May Day on everyone's calendar, Saturday, May 2nd, and please volunteer for this townwide beautification day by contacting the DDC at ddc@rosenet.org. From the Madison Senior Center, tax season has begun, and 7 volunteer counselors will be meeting with clients each Wednesday by appointment from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. through April 15th. The seniors have again been invited to a dinner dress rehearsal performance of the Madison High School spring musical Les Miserables on March 25th. And Donna Sue Doughton's Not Your Daughter's yoga class has 11 students, and if enough interest is shown, the class will continue on a weekly basis beginning in April. There will be a charge of $5 per class. And the summer seminar series, boy, I can't wait till summer, has its first meeting on February 18th, and 5 presenters are already booked. Madison resident Douglas Simon, professor at Drew University, will present the first seminar on July 6th, is America's Global Power Diminishing. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And related to the MACA representation on DDC, so we'll be coming back with an ordinance to
Yes.
change the
Yeah, yeah,
committee.
yeah, yeah.
So.
Yes.
Okay, Public Safety, Mr. Catanello.
Thank you, Mayor. The fire department reports that it has been very busy with the cold temperature-related calls for assistance by residents and businesses. From mid-January until present, the fire department has responded to 26 weather-related incidents. 17 of those are broken water pipes inside of structures, 7 heating and carbon monoxide-related problems, 2 roof issues that were related to ice hanging over the sidewalks. I'd like to also continue to remind our residents once again, to please try and clear the fire hydrants within 800 meters of your home after snowstorm in an effort to keep them clean and allow quick response time by our fire department in case of emergency. Congratulations to volunteer firefighter Dominic DeRosa on passing his Firefighter 2 state examination. And unfortunately, I need to end on a sad note. Former Madison volunteer Assistant Fire Chief Tom Flack passed away on Sunday, February 22nd. He was 87 years old. He joined the Madison Fire Department as a volunteer in 1957 and was active until 1987. He was a life member of the Madison Fire Department. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Utilities, Ms. Vitale.
Thank you, Mayor. This report is from the Electric Department. Besides snow removal at all the substations and repairing street lights and upgrades and removals and Mount Mark out requests, yesterday JCP&L lost the R96 feeder line to Madison, which caused a subsequent relay trip in the Kings Road substation, resulting a small areas of Madison to lose power. The crew was already out on another emergency call and were able to quickly close the affected breakers and restore power. We also had another small relay blip that lasted about a minute, right? It was just about a minute on that same feeder line. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. I just remembered something from the Utility Collection Department. I'm sorry. The Utility Collection Department has been working on simplifying the method of paying water and electric bills online. We'll have an insert in the April electric bills to clarify some of the problems that residents are currently experiencing. One of the things that came out of the Communications Strategic Planning Group was that a lot of people were having problems setting up. Donna Carey has been working very diligently on getting this, all corrected. So I think that it's going to be an easy method for people to start using the online paying. Thank you.
Thank you. Finance Borough Clerk, Mr. Landrigan.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief since much of my report will be covered in the budget overview tonight. What I just wanted to mention is tonight we're going to be hearing from the Open Space Committee, and we're going to make what should be just about the final adjustments to the budget. The administration has put together what I think is a great overview and summary, and they'll be sharing that with you this evening. But before we begin, I just want to emphasize what I said in an earlier council meeting. This budget was, and to some extent still is, a process that we've been going through. And throughout this process, we've been striving to meet or work toward the goals set forth by the different strategic planning committees. We've heard and taken into account the recommendations that have been made regarding rebuilding and maintaining our infrastructure. I again just want to thank the strategic planning committees for all their work. It's been invaluable, and each one of those members are an invaluable, and I say that word again, invaluable asset to our community. So thank you to each one of you. And again, and as always, we want to continue to hear and get feedback from our residents. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Health, Mr. Okowitz.
Thank you, Mayor. The Health Department would like you to know that they continue to monitor the measles outbreak that we keep hearing about, and indeed it has appeared in New Jersey, although fortunately a very minor occurrence. So far there's one confirmed case in Hudson County, And there's one suspected case in Mercer County. Lab reports had not come in at the point of this report being prepared. Residents, as always, are encouraged to be aware of the symptoms and also to check in on your immunization status. There also are new recommendations for adults on pneumonia vaccine. Pneumovax is the vaccine that most people receive once turning 65 years of age. It's a one-dose and done approach, and it's recommended that everyone have it unless pre-existing conditions put you at a higher risk. The difficulty with it is it's not a broad-based solution to the problem of pneumonia. It only covers certain aspects or certain types of pneumonia. In September of 2014, another vaccine was recommended by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices of the CDC. This vaccine is Prevnar 13. It's also recommended as a single dose for those 65 years and older. The Health Department recommends that you ask your provider as to whether you should have these vaccines, and they would also like you to be aware that Medicare B covers most of them. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And Public Works and Engineering, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, from the in the Rhodes area, Ridgeville Ave Improvement Project was submitted to New Jersey Department of Transportation on the 12th of February, and a follow-up meeting is being scheduled with them next week. An informal public hearing will be scheduled before one of the next two council meetings, so the public will be invited for comment on the project. Shortly thereafter, we will advertise for bids. The Waverly Place parking lot plans will be reviewed at the end of this week, and the bid documents and engineers' estimates will be completed the following week. We anticipate receipt of bids in April. For stormwater sewers, the Elmer Street survey has been received, and design plans will be forwarded to the county next month in preparation for a funding participation agreement. The library, the HVAC system, ceiling and lighting repairs will be rebid this spring once the consultant has modified plans for construction. We anticipate receiving the plans by the end of this week. And finally, for parks, Bailey Ellard Fields are expected to undergo a second phase of site remediation this summer. If approved, the fences will be relocated to expand the existing recreational space. It will also allow for more flexible field configurations. These plans will be coordinated with a licensed site remediation professional prior to bid. Similarly, at the Madison Recreation Complex, public use of certain fencing areas is being requested for trail construction and facility access. We will need to develop site plans for review by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection that conform to the LSRP. The goal of this project will be to expand public access to the complex. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did forget one thing in my comments, and that is congratulations to go out to our Madison High School ice hockey team for the their Haas Cup championship, first time ever. They have really made us proud, and we will hopefully have them here once their season's over, so we can give our congratulations directly to them. Any communications and petitions?
None received, Mayor.
All right, this is first of two invitations for discussion, and this is limited to items that are on the agenda, and also resolutions that are on the consent agenda. Agenda discussions that you may comment on are the open space quarterly report, the MRC Master Plan Advisory Committee, the introduction of the Recreation Ordinance, and the final adjustments of the municipal budget. Anyone wishing to comment, please step forward, state your name, your address, and the item you are commenting on. Mayor, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Gary Ruckelhaus. I live at 6 Fox Chase Road. I'm actually here representing the Library Board of Trustees. I want to thank the council for understanding our bid issues and how we had to reject the initial bids on our HVAC project, and you were good enough to listen to our problem and approve an additional $200,000. The status of that project is moving along very nicely. We couldn't be here without the help of Bob Vogel. He has been dramatically involved with us. He's been keeping us on track, and he's been doing a tremendous amount of value engineering to help try to keep this project under control cost-wise and keep it on track. We are on track to go to bid in April. and we are hoping that the bids come in a lot better than they did the first time. And we are planning on doing our construction in August into September. The main reason I want to be here this evening is I want to correct a $100,000 issue. Up until about an hour ago, I didn't have a clear understanding as to what happened, but I was able to track down Tom Bindinger changing planes in Chicago on his way back from Mexico. We are not asking for an additional $100,000. The $100,000 in that sheet was Tom's estimate of what we will be spending on the picture book room within the next 5 years. He put it in this year because we hope to do it this year, but with our funds, not with borough funds. The of the library have pledged the proceeds from the Touch-A-Truck. We have some money still in hand that has come from the Dodge Foundation a number of years ago, designated for bricks and mortar. So we put it all together, and we will be able to put most of that toward the picture book room. So it's unfortunate that the sheet that Tom sent to you had it on the column for this coming year, or this actual year. The impression that it was going to be sent to the council as a borough request. He thought it was just a 5-year plan of what we were going to be spending at the library. So I hope that explains it. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them on where we stand on the HVAC or where we stand on the $100,000. I was going to tell you that it was really $1 million, but I didn't think that would go over too well.
Pat, yeah.
I guess then, can you guys go back and revisit the whole 5-year plan, because it sounds like there's other items on here that may not be on your request to the borough for the next 5 years, because if that's one item that got added by mistake, maybe there's some others.
Well, the 5-year plan is really what we expect to spend. We don't expect to ask the council for all the money at this time.
Well, that's my point. This plan should really be what you're asking from us, because it's part of our 5-year spend. Your 5-year spend is independent of that, or is dependent on that.
So just the message is to review years 2016 through 2019 and make sure that the items that we have on our report, and we can get it to Tom and you, or reflect only what you're hoping to have the borough fund. And it certainly is, we appreciate the knowing what will be funded altogether from other sources, so we can see how the partnership is keeping that building going. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
And anyone else wishing to comment on items that are on the agenda? Seeing none, I close this part of the meeting, and we go on to the Open Space, Recreation, Historic Preservation Advisory Committee Quarterly Report. The chair was not able to make it, and Jim, you are providing the report with Ostry. Yeah.
Right, right. I just want to say that what we did here, from my perspective, is we did go to the various committees, Parks Committee, any committee that might possibly be interested in asking for funds, and so that's how we got the list together. We've been in great detail discussing the skating memorial soccer field with the Rec Advisory Committee, and I have met with Ray and Jim and Bob Vogel about the Bailey Ellard site remediation. And the Open Space Committee will be hearing from the museum tomorrow, as well as the Madison Environmental Commission on their request. So that's how we derived that list. And then Jim put together the numbers that you see in this report. So I'll turn it over to Jim. Oh, there he is.
Yep.
Popping.
Hey. Thank you, Ostry. Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to be talking about this report, which people who are watching it online, make sure it's online on RoseNet. People who are here this evening, there's outside at the table. Council received a copy of this over the weekend. This is an amended version that was at your seat this evening. And the summary information hasn't changed. It talks about the balances, the beginning of the year, the end of the year. And I'm not going to go into detail on the activity for 2014 to any great extent, except to point out that the tax levy was $308,711 for first and second quarter, and then again second and third quarter. During the course of 2014, $150,000 of contribution was received from the Madison Athletic Foundation. Field rentals and user fees of $92,418. That's significant. That was well above our estimates, and a little bit of interest earned. And then there's a listing of the various expenses, clearly bond, principal, and interest payments, short-term note interest and principal payments. The MRC DRE common area maintenance fee is a fee that we pay to Gale Rock, which has to do with utility easements in the road there, and the shared maintenance of that area. And then there's a list of some projects that were funded this year. What I'd like to do is more focus on the 2015, which is page 3 of the report for anyone that's looking at it. Go forward from there. You can see the beginning balance of $308,176. That has $50,000 in it. That was a contribution from the Madison Athletic Foundation that came in after the note was paid. The way we take the funds from the Athletic Foundation, all of that goes towards debt reduction. For now, that debt reduction is the note payment. That's the easiest way for us to reduce the debt clearly and direct it towards that. And last year, there was a $100,000 that went to it. On page 2, you can see that $215,000 of short-term principal was paid down. And this year, you'll see the third line. I just want to under outflows, MRC turf note minimum principal payment and 2014 MAF donation. A little confusing. I want to just tell you what that is. When you go and borrow short term, the minimum note payment that you have is based on the useful life of the asset and the total amount that you're borrowing. Every year we have to pay, no matter what we paid in the previous year, even if we paid $600,000, if we didn't pay down the note, we have to pay down $114,932. That's the minimum note payment. This item here, the third one here, that's $164,932. That is the minimum note payment of $114,932 and the $50,000 from the MAF. That happens in August when the note rolls over. That's when we pay that principal amount down. If the MAF makes a contribution between now and the end of the year, between now and August, that amount would increase. We would use that to pay the note down further. If that amount came in later on, we would do what we're doing here with the $50,000. It would sit in the open space account, but next year it automatically gets pledged to that. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. The fourth line down, the common area maintenance fee, and then there's some residual environmental issues over at the MRC. We just wanted to have a little bit of money budgeted for that. Possible projects, as Council President Bailey mentioned, we have multiple projects that we've spoken to various individuals about. They've not been fully vetted by the Open Space Committee, but as Austrie said, we went and reached out to the various groups. The first one is the Rosedale Skating Rink Memorial Soccer Field project. That number was listed, or that item was listed in the 5-year capital plan. We increased the number. I know some of you might have noticed that was $50,000 or $75,000. We've increased it to $100,000. We're actually going to be meeting later on in the week with someone that's going to be coming in and giving us a better idea of the scope of that project. But that project was fully discussed at the Recreation Advisory Committee, and they want to advance it. And so that's kind of out the door of that committee, and will be coming to open space and then to council for approval. And I want to point out and take a step back and talk about what we're doing here. We're really talking about possible projects. You're not tonight voting on any project, and it's probably really important to talk about how capital and open space gets discussed during the budget process versus how the operating budget gets discussed. When we discuss the operating budget, there's going to be a line-by-line document that's submitted to the state there's gonna be an introduction of that document and a hearing of that document, and that authorizes that spending. It authorizes us to go out and buy gasoline and rock salt and pay employees. As you know, with capital and open space, we don't do that. We don't have that set up in the budget. We contribute to the capital improvement fund, but every spend from the capital improvement fund and open space fund comes to you all as an ordinance, an individual voted on ordinance. So when the road reconstruction project comes, you vote on it. When this Rosedale skating rink improvement comes to council, you'll have an opportunity to specifically vote on that. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention and say that we're not really here to go through the list of projects one at a time and determine what's going to be funded tonight. That's not really the goal of it. The point of this exercise is to show that there's significantly more projects and more funds needed for debt repayment and the note repayment and environmental and the access and maintenance fee than we have available this year. So it might seem a little obtuse to have a negative 177 ending balance. Clearly, that's not going to happen. Council's going to have to make some decisions on what gets funded out of the possible projects and what doesn't get funded out of the possible projects. Go to the next page just to see if there's any. This is just a spreadsheet that I keep and I want to show and put in front of you every year. It just kind of outlines the funding. So this is page 4, land and turf field financing and cost summary. And it basically shows that how much was the initial cost for the field, and then how the field was funded. There's a breakdown between long-term and short-term borrowing that occurred. The long-term, that $1,265,000 number that you see right there, drops right down here to the schedule for the long-term bond. This is the long-term bond, and it's really two schedules because the long-term bond is broken down into two separate schedules, one for land and one for the turf field. So you'll see the annual principal payment, the annual interest for each of those. That's set. That's locked in to the long-term bond that we executed back in August 2013. And then we see the short-term note dollar amount here. It started out at $1.9 million for the field, and payments were made last year of $215,000. That's the $115,000 minimum note repayment and the $100,000 from the MAF. And from there, we're going to continue to hopefully be able to make payments. We obviously have to make the minimum note repayment. We may have a $1 million contribution from the transaction of GVR property sale close with the Board of Ed. That would significantly reduce that. If that comes in before August, we'll be able to knock that short-term number down significantly. Notes, you can only roll over notes for a certain number of years, and then you have to either pay it off or go into long-term bonds. And there's a little comment on that under the short-term that says notes can be rolled over 7 more times till August 2022. I'll just flip to the final page, which shows the Madison Athletic Foundation summary of contributions. Again, it's just good for us to have this in front of us so we know where we are in the process. The initial pledge was $1.275 million, and they're down to $625,000. And if they make their expected $155,000 payment for the next 5 years, that'll cover the residual amount there. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions? Carmela?
Yeah, can we go back to page 3? There's an interesting question that the committee put down here, and it said, question, should a reserve be established using OS funds to replace the MRC turf? This is something I kind of really strongly believe in. We're coming up quite a few years of heavy use on those MRC fields. And I think it's something that we really need to consider. So I'd like to put that out to open space that, there should probably be an automatic outflow on a yearly basis. We don't know how much it's going to cost to redo those fields, but we're talking about probably millions again. And so...
$750,000.
Yeah, okay. So, but that's a substantial amount of money. So I think that we have an opportunity at this point is to, create another line item in there in the outflows that, in the event that we have to replace them.
Rob?
Thank you,
And then,
Mayor.
then Ben and then Bob?
I understand Carmela's point of view. I would take the opposite approach, though. I don't necessarily think it's equitable to ask residents today to fund this so that residents in the future will be able to replace the fields. I think that the plan has always been to keep the user fees going, as long as they're playing on the fields. And, I think that source of funds can be used to satisfy any sort of debt that might need to be incurred to come up with the $750 or $1 million. I just think that the people who are using the fields at the time, should be the ones who are funding it, and that's how the user fees kind of work. So, I wouldn't necessarily ask residents today to start funding something, and it's a tough call, right? Because we know that we're going to have this liability in the future. It's just, does it make sense to ask residents today to pay for someone who'll be able to play on the field? I think the effective life is roughly 10 or 12 years. We've been playing on it for 3 or 4 now, so you've probably got another 7 to 6, 7 years to go. So while it would be nice to build up the reserve just to be able to do it, you're still asking people today to fund events that will happen in the future. So
Yeah, I think what we can do is, for combining the two comments, is charge the Open Space Committee to look at the user fees as an ongoing source, and the timing of retiring the debt, and how the timing of the fields and how the moon and stars line up. So we'll hand that off.
Kind of confuses me though, Mayor, because we're using the user fee towards debt service right now.
Yeah.
So you can't.
Yeah, I'm just, what
I don't want to rebut Rob.
I think we're in agreement. Basically, what I was saying is to have them go through the exercise of look at the anticipated date of retiring the debt, and recognizing, okay, the user fees can shift over, but see what the timing is with the replacement of fields, and the idea that we'd love to have that be covered by open space. So
in my mind, the user fee is sort of a perpetual cash flow that is always used to pay down debt.
So we can, Ben, and then Bob.
Yeah, I think there was a minor misstatement, and it got my attention when you said it. In the footnote on page 5, it says that the MAF expects to raise $155,000 a year for the next 5 years to pay down the remaining 6 1/4. I think you mean next 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah. Right. And yeah, I have some thoughts on the fields too, but I suspect this isn't the right meeting, so I'll just let it go for now.
Austria will take that back to the
Right. I've got
open
it
space. Yep.
down there.
Pat? I'm sorry, you had Bob in the bullpen. Bob was on deck and you were in the hole.
I'm just going to follow up on what Carmela said. I'm adverse to debt if you can avoid it. So I understand what both Pat and Rob are saying. I guess the key to the whole process is this. And this is what-
Carmela and Rob.
It's me.
Carmela.
Carmela,
It's here.
yeah.
It is here.
Sorry. How could I forget you? I guess where I'm coming down is, the key to the whole process is going to be identifying when they're going to wear out, then how much those user fees are going to bring in annually, and if we have to bond, plus when you bond, you're spending more than you really need to. It's debt, you're paying interest on something, and, I plan on living here after those fields retire, so I'm either going to pay now or pay later. That's the way it's going to work. So that, to me, that would be the charge.
Hey, Pat?
Okay, so now I'll agree with Rob, so I'll fulfill Bob's prediction. No, I think we need to look at the cash flow, because I think over time, and there's going to be a short-term issue, because number one, in a year or so, when the Board of Ed makes its payment to us, some of that user fee money is going to go away, so that 85 is going to shrink.
That's a good point.
So we're going to have to take a look at a smaller cash flow. But I think ideally, and when we discussed this years ago about the user fees and the rentals, I think part of the idea was in the short term, it would help cover the initial bond. But over time, as the fields wore out, it would allow you to do another 10-year to 15-year note and then use the user fees and the field rentals to pay for that. So literally, the people who were enjoying those newly skinned fields would be paying for it, as opposed to sort of starting to save money for the next 6 or 7 years and really depriving the rest of this projected list of opportunities to have to wait longer, because every dollar we save for 7 or 8 years from now is a dollar that we can't spend on one of these projects. So I'm really happy that we have a good list now. Obviously, it's a little bit more than we have or expect to have this year. So ideally, I'd really like to see the Open Space Committee, I guess they're the kind of the gatekeeper, not, I don't want to call it gatekeeper, but they're the ones that are assembling this and also getting input, maybe try to help us prioritize this into what we should be looking at this year and next year and the year after, because we have 2 years worth of projects here at this point.
Well, the problem is oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You can answer.
The problem is it's how the project gets developed.
Yes.
And when it gets to the Open Space Committee, because I know tomorrow night we have the MEC's project, which would be the MRC shed reforestation plannings and management plan.
Ooh,
And
glad you said that.
that's before us tomorrow. So that grant has been filled out. And so the open space would advise the council to probably support that on March 9th, as is the museum is under the gun, because they have to get their matching grant from us in order to apply for the county. So they're going to be before us. So, and then some projects, you know, which I would hope would be done in 2015, they may not get off the ground because we don't have enough manpower to get the drawings together. So it's.
So I guess we need to get Bob's opinion about what parts of these he can get organized.
Well, I've already talked to Bob Vogel about it.
And actually, you raised an interesting point, because when I was at the MEC meeting last week, they mentioned, or Stephen Stocker mentioned, that he had put out a lot of different grant requests, including some of these items. So I was wondering, to some degree, if we held off a month, I think he said in April he would know whether or not he was going to get funding for some of the things.
Right.
That we may actually be able to take this off the list or reduce the number based on whatever he's able to get in from the outside.
We'll make sure we ask him that question tomorrow.
And then the second thing was, I guess on some of these, especially some of the bigger ticket items, are we also asking some of these groups if they're able to pitch in either with labor or with dollars to help bring the number down, so possibly we could get to more of them this year?
I've spoken to each of the groups.
Okay.
That, look, obviously, if you can leverage other dollars, that would be great, because that's the way the fund was set up. I mean, that's the attempt to try to get grants to match whatever. So there's, you know, it's just like when we purchased the land, the Open Space Trust Fund never put in much. They put in a bit, and then we got the grants from Green Acres or from the county. So that's what ideally, that's number one. If that they can do that, that's a home run.
Yeah. Perfect, thank you.
I'll go
Ben
last.
and-
No, that's all right. Rob.
Rob?
Thank you. I just have, and it might not, and I have two questions. The MRC handicap accessible sidewalk from Ridgedale. My question isn't whether or not we should do it, but is this the appropriate vehicle for funding? I don't know, you know, shouldn't that be included in the borough's capital plan? And then I see we have another $200,000 spent on Bailey Ellard. I have heard that there's debate that the high school may be building new athletic fields, and I'm wondering, are we communicating with them as to their future plans? Because if in fact we get a couple more fields built close to the MRC, you know, potentially the need for Bailey Ellard would be reduced if we could come to some sort of a sharing agreement. So I would ask that before we fund this, we have an exhaustive discussion with our partners in the BOE to find out what their plans are.
So, as with anything, each of these projects would come to the council with a full discussion. So,
I'm
so
saying that I'd
so we'll
look
just
into
make
this.
sure,
This is my-
yeah, so we'll make sure we cover the future look as we invest. Ben?
Yeah, I just have two very brief comments. One is, I didn't think we were going to get into this kind of detail, and I said I'd pass on talking about how we fund the reskinning of the fields. I just want to leave as a alternative way of thinking about it, that the fields have become a public good, not unlike our schools, swimming pool, downtown. There are a lot of things that some of us and most of us end up paying for that we don't use. However, that's what makes Madison. And so they are public goods that create Madison. And to that extent, you're a citizen of the town, you benefit, your housing value benefits from these public goods. So there's a strong argument to be made the other side. I'm not interested in pursuing it in great detail tonight, but I just wanted to put that on the table. My final one, and I'm sorry that I don't think no one's here from the committee, but I just wanted to say, at least for the tape, thank you very much, committee. I mean, it's always the quarterly, sorry,
yeah,
Lisa.
Lisa
I didn't
Ellis
see
is
you
here.
first.
Oh, there we
But
go.
as always, I mean, it's a thorough job, and it really makes clear what not only has taken place, but what is likely to come to us in the future. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Thank you. All right, item 2, MRC Master Plan Advisory Committee.
That's me again. Okay.
Yes, Audrey, up again.
The Master Plan Advisory Committee met, as you can see, on February 9th, to review what we had started from 13 to 14. And we identified areas that we thought we needed to discuss further, and projects we had to make sure we finished. And so we feel that it's necessary to keep the committee going. And we'd like you to approve the continuation of the MRC Master Plan Committee for at least the next 6 months.
And I know you put 6 months, and to make things consistent, the
Oh, yeah.
the appointment under new business would be through the end of the year. That way,
Correct.
if you need 6 months and a day, you don't have to come back.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Any other comments? Okay, the committee's doing great work, so we will appoint them under under new business.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you were up again with introduction of recreation ordinance.
Well, I think Pat Rowe was the liaison for a good part of this, but I'm just bringing it now to the council for approval. It's the recreation ordinance that they've been working on. I think Jim had a major role, yeah.
You can have Zach talk about it.
And,
Zach.
and Zach is here, so
I didn't see you, I'm sorry.
he's easy to miss.
Yeah, no.
Sorry,
Good.
Zach.
Anyway, that's lead-in. But, yeah, I'll just briefly go over the purpose of the ordinance. It's kind of wide-ranging, but I think what we tried to do was to cull together and codify our existing policies, safety regulations, best practices, not only for the Recreation Department, but for our existing recognized 501c3s as well. So if you take a look at it, it covers everything literally from coaches' background checks to the lightning policy to how to reserve a field, pretty much the blueprint.
That's great.
Matt?
I just had one question, and I meant to send this to Matt. There was nothing in the ordinance that said when the coaching background checks would have to start. And I think, to be fair to the groups, we're going to have to give them a little bit of time. Some of them already have that, but I don't think everybody does. Is that correct?
Yeah, if I can do, the effective date we put on the ordinance is August 1st. The overwhelming majority of the programs are already in compliance with almost everything laid out. As you know, there are a couple stragglers, so we thought August 1st is a fair deadline.
Okay. Is that actually in there? Because I don't remember seeing that date anywhere.
I don't believe that August 1st is in the actual ordinance. I think that's going to be in the policy implementing the ordinance. The ordinance authorizes you to do the criminal background check.
Okay.
But we can... What's that?
Why don't you just change the effective date on the list, too?
Actually, I didn't mind almost everything else being effective immediately, it was just the background
It's
checks
effective
that.
immediately.
Yeah. Are there any spring sports that you're aware of that do not meet that requirement?
All the spring sports meet that
Okay,
criteria.
Oh, then
so
we'll be
so
fine,
I
okay.
would say then just leave it the way it is.
Okay, that's fine,
Yeah.
that's fine.
I think I'd be more comfortable leaving it the way it is, and
Okay.
then if there's a reason to make an exception.
That's fine.
Ms. Wood, Carmella, sorry.
Zach, I hate when people do this after a lot of work. But I had a question. The creation and the purpose, okay? The ordinance is like really great. But I'm just wondering if we should include, when applicable, anything that has anything to do with handicap events. It's not shown here at all, and we're handicap accessible just about every place, for all of our sports. And I just thought it would be one step further for us in that creation and that purpose is to mention that fact.
Yeah,
I don't know how or whatever. Okay, that was my first thought.
Right now, under Section 2, the Recreation Director shall administer and operate the athletic fields and facilities for indoor and outdoor. It's pretty broad. I think what we
Okay.
could probably do is rather than have to redo an ordinance, use it in the rules and regs.
Okay.
Where you can talk about handicap programs, et cetera. Because
Okay.
we're required under the ADA to be handicap accessible.
Right.
But we could do that in the regulation
Yeah,
part.
I just thought that the use of those words would be
That's a
very
good idea.
appropriate in this town. We've worked very hard. My second question is that under your policies and procedures, one of the things that I noticed, I mean, I live across from Lucy D, so we see everything that kind of goes on there. And it's not unusual when there are no sports actually, no sports teams like actually using the fields, which is very odd, but every once in a while it happens. And groups of people will just, gravitate to those fields and play baseball or go up and play soccer in different places and whatever. And I don't see anything in here in that policy and procedures that makes a reference to what are the rules and regulations for those particular people. Okay, because I'm assuming we have liability. If they come on one of our fields or whatever, just as recreational, baseball or whatever, do we have a liability? And I don't see it in there, so, it's just something for you to think about. Maybe we need to have a rule and a regulation, whether or not, it could be an easy call to you saying, hey, listen, 10 or 15 of us guys want to get together tonight and play baseball or soccer or whatever. I just think that it would kind of...
Policy manual section, I believe there's a 5-step reservation process that we list on the website.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there is.
That applies to every group.
Okay.
So it requires a certificate of insurance. Now it requires proof that all employees, say it's a summer camp for kids, a for-profit summer camp, they're now required to submit documentation that all their employees are subject to a background check. So any outside group or non-recognized entity is required to submit through that 5-step process.
Yeah, but do you know what I'm talking about? There could be a group of guys that just say, hey, listen, Sunday afternoon, nobody's using, say, the fields up in Bailey Ellard. I think we'll go and play soccer or whatever. Okay. They don't assume, I know that, they don't assume that they have to call you and let you know that they're on the fields.
It's a challenge of what is a pickup game and what is organized activity.
Well,
An
organized to me is pretty simple.
But if a group of young adults that want to get together and just play a quick soccer game, it's use of a park, in my mind.
It
And
is
it's-
to me, too. That's
Yeah,
why I'm asking the
right.
question.
Once you guys have-
I mean, what's our liability?
It's just like any other park. I'm sorry,
Your liability.
Got the answer to my question? Don't worry about it.
Liability, this facility is covered through your insurance policy.
Right.
And the insurance, the Morris Joint Insurance Fund is aware and is cognizant that it is a public area that people do go on. So you have those, Thanksgiving football games among alumni, things of that nature. If it's incidental, you're not gonna have a problem. The thing that we have to be careful of, and the thing that we talked about is, if we're noticing an organized group of people going down there every Sunday morning within a ref, that's when we have to step in.
That's
And
what I'm-
And team doctors.
That's not a
Team
problem.
Yes. Right.
But if it's a group of high school kids in the summer playing a little touch football,
Right.
you know, I think what the mayor said is, it really is more akin to a park at that point.
Yeah.
And we have liability coverage for that very purpose.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I
And the
mean,
other
in
thing,
case
too, is-
we have that question asked of us, we
The
know
other
that
thing too
we're.
is the statutes in New Jersey under Title 59 give public entities such as Madison a lot of cover. Because it's basically, if you are palpably unreasonable, if you know about a dangerous condition, you don't take steps, you can be held liable. But that doesn't mean that, you know, so for example, if people are using this as an organized athletic area and we're not enforcing it and something happens, then we could be in trouble. That's why it's important for us to just make sure we keep our eyes and ears open, to enforce that people who are using it on a regular basis follow our policies and procedures and pay the rental fees, et cetera.
And one thing I'd like to see in the ordinance, but it's not necessary because we already have an ordinance that addresses it, but certainly in the policies, I might have missed it, is just a statement of all Madison parks are smoke-free and users must adhere to those laws. And I guess we don't need to add it to the ordinance, but we can add it to the guidelines. Okay, so this is Ordinance 8, 2015. Zach, thank you so much for all your work on this. All right, 2015 Municipal Budget. Jim, you've got at that point in more detail. And as with, I forgot to reiterate the rules of our last meeting, but a reminder for all the council members with all our budget meetings to, you know, keep the things to the higher level. Let's not get in the weeds or the paper clips, and also keep the discussions on topic. And also, as Jim mentioned before, as we get into the capital budget, what's important right now is the transfers, because those will be set as opposed to the particular projects where they will be approved by ordinance with each project. All right, Jim?
Okay, I'm sorry, before you begin, just a point of clarification. At the March 9th meeting, when we do the introduction,
Yes.
there will be time prior to that to discuss the budget? As
Yes.
opposed to tonight?
Yes. In addition to, but it, yeah,
In
that's-
addition to.
But yeah, but it will be basically the goal, since we need to introduce, and there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done between now and introduction with both Robert and our auditor.
Right.
That, you know, if there are substantial discussions and changes to a budget on March 9th, we're now pushing back introduction and then pushing back our deadline. So if we get to that point, and we may end up scheduling an extra meeting as opposed to going to the 9th for that level.
Thanks for the clarification.
Because I was assuming after tonight, we're going to go away with our direction, and that's going to be what's going to turn into the introduced budget. I didn't think that there would be additional changes by anybody between now and then, except for what was agreed to here tonight.
That is the goal, but if I get sense that we are not on that path, the alternative is to schedule another meeting, which pushes Robert and our auditor to turn it over very fast, but
Actually, did we look at that? Because when I looked at the DCA guidelines, it did sound as if we had until the meeting after March 13th to do an introduction of budget. And so that would still allow us to do the introduction at the second meeting in March and not violate any of the rules. I don't know if that creates any problems in terms of the final passage by a certain date with a certain number of days in between, but I know that reading the DCA guidelines, we technically don't have to have it done by the 9th.
Right. Yeah, and the guidelines provide for 3/13 introduction or the first council meeting thereafter. The issue, though, I think that the Strategic Plan Committee has raised is if this is supposed to be a spending plan for the community, we're 4 months into the year already.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
Well-
the sooner you get something on the books, the better off you are in terms of the structure of our finances.
yeah, so thank you for the clarification. So we have some flexibility, but yes. All right.
So the goal for this evening is for me to be brief, and also, but you're all correct. We've had a number of documents that you've received. You've received open space, you've received a 5-year capital plan. As our little budget chart showed, we kind of gone around full circle now. We started out with strategic planning, capital, department operating, utilities, 5-year capital plan, open space this evening, and now we're kind of circling back. Council did receive an amended operating budget document, and there's also copies of that outside that included some additional information, municipal sources of revenue, as well as schedule of miscellaneous revenue not anticipated, as well as an updated budget in brief document, as well as the last document on the sheet, which just shows the projection out in the budget in brief format. We have the projection out in the alternate budget format that strategic planning has offered, but some people are comfortable with this, I'm comfortable with this, so we now have this showing 4 years of 2014 current year and then 2 projections out. So it just kind of gives you an idea where the issues are, where we see capital going. I'd like to point out that we're looking to fund capital at a higher level next year. We're funded at $3 million this year, and there was a small change. And Ray, maybe you want to talk about it for a minute about the Madison-Chatham joint meeting, what changed there?
Sure. The joint meeting operating committee was able to reduce the operating budget for 2015, which generated approximately $53,000 of less obligation on the borough's allocated share of the budget. So the recommendation is that we should reallocate those funds from the joint meeting line item to supplement the $3 million for general capital and increase the funding there by $53,000 approximately.
So you'll see on the budget here and also on the first page, $3 million went to $3,053,000 for the capital improvement fund. Some other changes that were on here during the discussion process, we talked about, Pat and others talked about splitting out the water surplus and showing it, instead of it used to be part of municipal sources, we've now split that out, and line 2 here shows the water surplus as its own line item for revenue. And then the third change that we did was we split out electric surplus into a third line. We have electric surplus for capital, and we had electric surplus for operating. But really that operating number was operating and debt service, and we thought it was appropriate to split that number out. So that number's now been split out for 2014, 15, and in the out years. And that comes a little closer to representing what strategic planning had showed was how much of the utilities surplus was being used to fund operations. So if you add line 6, electric surplus operating, and the water surplus, line 1A, that gives you $1.6 million. That's the money that's coming from the utilities that's going to pay for rock salt, to pay for employees' wages, and to supplement the municipal operating budget. And so I want to just point those changes out to you and make sure that everyone was aware of that. Beyond that, I did want to answer, Councilman Landrigan asked me, because I know we had touched on it the last meeting, to talk a few minutes about the electric utility, because we kind of went through it really quickly before, and it was specific to rates, and I don't know if you want to jump in now and say something about it.
What I had mentioned was, we had talked about, and had been discussed quite a bit about, how much of the electric surplus was needed for capital. And conversely, if you were to reduce your electric rates, what the impact would be on your overall surplus. So what I asked Jim to do tonight was to just illustrate, if there was an electric rate cut, what the impact on the surplus would be, and then coincidentally, what the impact on our ability to fund capital would be.
So buried within the document that was issued on February 18th, and there's a corrected document that's now online, which is the electric utility budget presentation, is the chart that's up on the screen now, which we saw briefly last week. And boy, there's a lot of numbers. But I wanted to just point out to you the out year numbers here that are in green. And this assumes all the projections that we have in here going forward in operating and in the electric utility. So we've projected out in the electric utility 3 years our costs, 3 years for capital needs. Those capital needs are only projected out to be the smaller amount of capital, not the higher amount that we had discussed briefly with Martin Barbados. So you can see the out years here at the bottom. I don't know if you can see the little red. That's still at 400. Then all this number here, these numbers here, less utilized in municipal budget. This is the dollar amount that carries forward to the municipal budget up here. That ties into all the projections that we have going forward out in 16 and 17. So the question is, will we have any money for an electric rate cut? And if so, how much? From administration standpoint, there is additional funds that will be coming in the out years. If you look at these two numbers here, in 2016, we're projecting to generate $7.5 million in surplus, and we're only using 6.9. So there is $500,000 in additional revenue that we're not needing that we're not anticipating using in that year. What's an appropriate use for that? Clearly, this year, council may, and the council liaisons may talk capital and try to bring those numbers together, and they may come back and say, Jim, this $400,000 number needs to be boosted. Or they could come back and say that $3.5 million number in the operating budget for capital, that needs to be boosted. So there's some money, but if you look at $500,000, what's that like on a percent cut for $22.3 million? It's only about 2 or 2.5%. So if you as council decided next year that you're looking for an electric rate cut here, unless something else changes in this document or unless something else changes in the operating projections, you could really only do about a 2%. And from an administration standpoint, I would suggest not doing that. And I think the folks in strategic planning would suggest not doing that. And I want to reiterate what we're doing here with the funds. And this is what Ben talked about last week. We build up surplus throughout the year. And at the end of 2014, we generated $5.9 million in surplus total, and we had a little bit in the kitty from last year, so the total balance at year end was 6.5. We're utilizing almost all of that. You can see we're utilizing 6.2 million right here in the following year. Let's go to the next year. We're generating $7 million in 2015 on December 31st. We've got a little bit more, 7.3 million in the bank, but we immediately go and use all of it. So January 1st, theoretically, we go from $7.3 million to $400,000. Nothing else left in electric utility surplus, which can be that buffer and can be used for any type of emergent situation. So I might suggest to build up surplus here a little bit. And if you remember your water utility document, which was a single-page document, which was issued last week, we have a significant amount of surplus in that water utility. We have 1.5 million in that water utility, and it's only a $2.2 million a year business. That would be the equivalent of us having a surplus in the magnitude of 14 million or more, 15, 16 million in electric utility, and we clearly don't have that. So to answer Bob's question, an electric rate cut would require other changes to happen in the budget, and it would chew into all of the excess that we have. So that's why when we advanced the budget, we did not make any assumption for an electric rate cut.
Bob?
I just a little point of clarification here. Under each year, you have amount generated current year. So what we're saying is in 2015, which we're just in month 2 of it right now, that's what we're anticipating generating this year.
Correct.
We don't know if we're going to hit that mark yet.
That's correct, yeah, sure.
Right, and even for 2016, it's predicated on success with the contracts and no drop in usage.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So there are a lot of estimates in there, and we have not locked in all our contracts in 17, 18. So I wanted to point that out. And, I'm sorry, do you have a question? Okay. Okay, and I also wanted to show that, so we have a good story that's coming down the road in the electric utility. I think it's a good story. We have a story that we need to talk about a little bit in and this is, I apologize, a summary of what we just talked about, assumes no rate reduction. And the bottom line here, you can see the last line on here. Based on projections, the water utility is not generating enough surplus in 2016 and 17. To cover what we're pulling down. So let's go to that water utility one-page sheet that we gave out last week. It's kind of tipped. Anyway, this shows, this is a similar document to what we had with the electric utility a few pages back. It shows kind of how's the business doing. That's this level up here. And then what's happening in surplus at what's happening in surplus balances. So we are generating estimated surplus in the out years of 420, 359, 296 in the out years of 15, 16, and 17. But we are annually estimating to pull 500,000 out. So it's 296 generated, 500 out. You're seeing a decline in the surplus balances. So if you see the beginning balance here of 1.5, 1.58, by the end of 2017, it goes from 1.588 at the beginning of this year to 1.163. This is assuming that there's no change in water rates. This is even assuming that we're not going to drop the water rates back by 10%, which is that sunset water rate provision. But as you all recall from the presentation from Martin Barbado, we are very low in our water rates compared to the surrounding communities and the investor-owned water utilities. So I wanted to point out two important things. The electric utility surplus in the out years, we will be making some we'll be generating more surplus than we're using, but the exact opposite is happening in the water utility. We don't need to make these decisions today in terms of rates. You can make decisions in terms of rates later on in the year or next year, ultimately to affect whatever is going to happen with water utility rates or electric rates. It does not need to be made tonight, but the lack of sustainability in the water utility is something that's going to need to be addressed at some point in time.
Pat?
Well, but I mean, to some degree we are, because we're going to take an extra $50,000 out this year. I think we took an extra 50 out last year or the year before, just to run the municipality. So in many respects, we are kind of creating our own issue by making the decision to increase the use of surplus, or current surplus. And so I go back to the question is, why do we decide to do that this year, given that we're seeing the surplus actually going to be drawn down? I mean, is that something that we consciously decided we wanted to do?
Yeah, I think it was, and it's the electric surplus. Yeah, to reduce our reliance on the electric surplus, and because the amount of surplus as a percentage of the annual business is very high in the water utility right now. So we can absorb a number of years of this unsustainable track, but at some point, you're right, Pat, we've got to fix it.
Rob?
Thank you, but does it make sense to reduce our reliance on the electric utility surplus by increasing our reliance on the water utility surplus?
That's an excellent question for council. I actually could make a good argument for that only because...
Because you think the rates are low?
Well, A, it's market rates. B, it would generate conservation. But more importantly, you could actually say that the surplus generated in the water utility is more sustainable because we don't have the cost of buying the water. We just pump it out of the ground. As opposed to electricity, our concern has been, and will always be, how are we doing on the contracts in the out years? And there's always an exposure there that we really don't have in the water utility. So you can make that argument. It's a little obtuse, but you can make it.
No, I don't think it's obtuse.
Okay.
Substitute one for the other. And we are paying, in general, although albeit not to the same percentage different, the residents pay a little bit more for electricity here than with an investor-owned utility.
Yes, and that's a good point, and we wanted to address that. We mentioned it briefly in last week, but with the BGS auctions, the council will be getting a memo on the BGS auctions that were just closed. Basic Generation Service, BGS, is how the investor-owned utilities buy their electricity. And their costs for PSE&G went up by 2.5% for their, not just that contract, for the entire cost for every customer is going to go up by 2.5%. So when Martin reported earlier in the year in his strategic planning that we were about 7 to 8% off of PSE&G's rates, we were a little bit high of PSE&G. We were a little bit low from some of the other municipal electric utilities that draw surplus. That gap between us and PSE&G has shrunk by 2.1%. They also have a rate case in front of the Board of Public Utility, which is saying we want to increase our rates again, not just for the cost of electricity, but for other reliability improvements and capital improvements that we want to do to our infrastructure. So rates will be going up again. Our rates haven't gone up for 5 years, and basically what's happening is the other investor-owned utilities and municipal utilities are catching up to us. So that's a viable way of looking at it. If we don't take rate action, but don't take any rate increases, the tables will turn and we'll once again be below PSE&G.
Hey, thank you. All right.
So with that, I'd like to open it up. We have Robert here, we have Kim here, we have myself, we have Ray. We've put out a lot of information about a lot of different things, whether it's a revenue question, an expense question. The mayor asks that it not be paper clips, but if there's any question or concern within the operating budget or any of the assumptions that we have here, if not, our goal will be to take all these documents, finalize them. We do have some minor tweaks. Ben pointed out a mistake in the open space, and put them all together, put a cover page on top, explain what the impact is to your taxes, show the house, show the breakdown of the county and the Board of Ed, and show why we, as administration and finance liaisons, think this is an appropriate budget, and kind of put it all in a nice bow in one single package, so you're not sitting here with 10 different packages.
Bob?
One comment you did make, Jim, was that in regards to the electric rates, which has, been talked about for quite some time, we have time to make that decision. We don't have to make that now as part of this budget.
Correct.
We could really, since we're only 2 months into the year, possibly mid-year would be a good time to really address that.
Yeah, absolutely. We could, in 3 months from now, we could find out that a new tenant is going into Giralda 5, and there could be some positive news that's impacting the amount of customers. We could find out negative news, but really what we're talking about is the cash collection number here,
Right.
modifying that. It doesn't modify any of the other assumptions. It doesn't
Right.
modify what we think we're going to need in purchase power, and ultimately doesn't modify how much we're going to draw in surplus this year.
Right.
But it does have that impact in the out years. Whatever rate action you're taking is going to have an impact in the out years, and that's why we want to get 2016 and 17 out there. So if a rate action happens, we can pull this document right up and say, okay, you're interested in doing that? We'll show you the impact.
Right. Thank you.
Ben?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that I felt that the Strategic Planning Committee's efforts informed the process this year. I don't think that everything, and I'll use the editorial we, would have liked to accomplish has been reflected here. But on the other side of it, I don't know that it could have been. We would need department heads thinking in different ways. We would need to assess our capital requirements quite differently than we do now. So I'd like to think of this as a transition year where we did start talking about out years much more seriously, where there is a concept of planning that's been incorporated here. The strategic planning committees will continue their work. And I would like to believe that same time next year, we'll be having a somewhat different discussion. But nevertheless, I appreciate how much progress we've made in 1 year. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Rob?
Thanks. So, I just, I look at these numbers and even though there's a slight reduction in the reliance on electric surplus, looks like we're, going to increase our reliance on other surpluses, I really think it makes sense to, and if the council would prefer to have a strategic planning committee do it, to look at alternate revenue. We cannot rely on surpluses. We cannot rely on just jacking up taxes, because, we have got to figure out a way to generate more revenue outside of just surplus or taxes. I think that is something that if we want to set up a new strategic planning committee or something, but we have to look at that as well, because even with this budget, right? And I know there's some, and what's going to happen in the out years. The demands for capital that have been laid out by the strategic planning committees are great, and if we want to get close to that, and we want to get close to the mix that they suggested in terms of the spend, I don't ever see electric rates being cut. I see water rates going up, and I see municipal taxes going up. So, the only other side we have to monkey with is revenue. and we got to figure out some alternate ways to generate revenue.
And certainly the theme word we've heard, which I think is appropriate, is sustainability. And as we look at these future years going out there, we've come a long ways in the time that I've been sitting down below and up here as far as getting there. And certainly the more sources of revenue we have, the better off we be, whether it's a redevelopment project that brings a pilot and so on. So I think that certainly, yeah, obviously, as you point out, we're not going to come up with new, in the next 15 minutes, new sources, but we just got to make sure it stays front and center.
For next year.
Yeah, and I would just, not to take you to task, but maybe the adverb jacking up was not quite the right one.
I'm sorry, what can I say?
Thank you.
Maybe, okay. I agree.
All
Apologize. I'll withdraw jacking up. And
Thank you.
The conservative, moderate increases. How's
There you go. Thank Jim, if you have a clarification, then we go to Bob.
Yeah, sorry.
Real quick, I mean, we don't have the GVR pilot in here in our projections because we're cautious. So there's 400,000 in new revenues that are coming out. And if we continue to have increased assessments and the assessed value of Madison continues to increase, that's tax relief every year. Right now, we put out that our taxes are, this property tax number on this budget is increasing by 1.5%, but the residents will only feel 0.75%. So if we're successful in continuing to attract development, whether it's improvements to homes or improvements to commercial properties, that's a great way to offer some tax relief.
Bob?
And Rob, a lot of what you said is, I'm going to echo a bit here right now. When you talk to the residents, and you say, what do you want? Well, we want either flat or our taxes to go down. They want electric rates to go down, but you want your roads done and you want your services maintained. Well, this budget kind of does that as best you can, because we are in a catch-up mode right now. We needed to catch up from years of underinvesting in our capital, in our infrastructure. That's what this budget accomplishes. So we are catching up with the infrastructure repairs and maintenance that we needed to do. Can we do it all in 1 year? No, we can't. I mean, that's impossible. Are we maintaining our services? Absolutely we are. Did we have a modest tax increase? Yes. It goes back to the tax increase we had, not last year, but the year before. Last year we had a 0 plus we had some one-time events which we could leverage from. And, when I think of tax increases, I think of the compounding effect, meaning, okay, you say 2% this year. Well, what's 2% this year? Well, if you do it again next year, it's 2% on top of that 2%. So to the extent that we can keep that hit at a minimum, it helps the average taxpayer. Are we going to look for additional sources of revenue? Well, that's why I like this budget. It's not banking on money we don't have yet. It's banking on what we have now, and maybe a little bit on what we hope to get, but we're not paying that out yet. I mean, we're hoping to see more in electric. We don't know if we're going to get it, so we'll do it if we get that money. So I think this is a good conservative budget. It uses what we have, and it delivers, I would say, a good portion of what the average taxpayer, myself included, would like to see. Thank you.
Any other comments? Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the things that still are concerning to me are a couple of things. One is the electric utility cap. We have a difference of opinion between what the utility committee is saying, what our superintendent is saying, and even to some degree in general capital, the way the money is being allocated. I talked to Ray Friday, and I'm not responsible for electric, but in terms of general capital, I do want to work with Bob, if not to change the way it's allocated this year, by October of this year, at least be in a better position to be sure that we're allocating the money properly in next year's capital budget. Because I really feel there's a serious disconnect between what a committee of people who did a full year's worth of investigation are telling us and how we're putting the money out there. And then the electric utility, that almost begs the question based on something that Robert told us at the last meeting. Should we even be putting that much money in the electric utility capital budget, or should we just put it into general capital? Because if we can move it from general back to electric, but we can't move it from electric to general, we've already got $700,000, I think, this year. Sorry?
The balance?
What's the balance?
932, general capital?
No, what's the balance in electric right now? before anything's allocated. I thought it was 7.
Robert's shaking his head. What do you
Yeah,
say?
so it's 7 and change, and we're gonna add 4, and Mike's gonna spend 180 or whatever it is. So that seems to be an odd situation. We really need to reconcile that. The other thing that I'm still a little bit concerned about is, the Budget Committee gave us a bunch of guidelines. And in 2 key areas, we're still not coming close to meeting them. In fact, in some respect, we're going the other direction. And that's utility transfers and the size of the prior year end surplus. And I really think that it's going to be difficult. We can't change that this year, but I think we need to really look during this year as to whether or not the numbers they gave us are valid ranges. Should we be tweaking them? Or if they are valid, how are we going to get to them in the next couple of years? Because the way we're going right now, we're just kind of flat or moving ahead in the opposite direction from what they gave us. And I think they spent a lot of time thinking about it. We sat and talked to them, and they shared some of the concerns I had regarding over-reliance on the utilities for funding our budget, and in many respects, the guidelines that they gave us and the numbers that we're seeing for this year and the next couple of years are not really helping in that respect. So that's my feedback on the budget at this point.
And, just like, all right, go ahead, Ben. And,
Yeah, can I just have clarification?
Sure.
Which of those numbers are you referring to? Because I didn't quite.
Utility transfers.
Yes.
I think it says it should be 17 to 20. So it was 21 last year,
That's right.
23, almost 27. It's coming back down.
And what is the other one?
The prior year and municipal surplus.
Surplus, yes.
And, that is continuing to grow. So again, they almost suggested that there should be some limitation on it even growing, and we're growing it faster than I think they
Well,
were suggesting we should be.
It's not so much a limitation on growing it, although you could look at it that way. It's rather that you want it to be at a certain proportion in relation to the total budget. Now, interestingly, we were coming at it the other way, which is to say you don't want to be below a certain level because then you have S&P issues, you have, and from what we could determine in the literature, it's advisable to have between 20 and 25% municipal surplus. And you're right, this year we're at 26 point something, 7 or 8. That's kind of a high-class problem, but,
Well,
but nevertheless, it does point in a direction that bears some further examination. As far as the reliance on electric utility transfer, I mean, I'm agreeing with everything I've heard. If you look back historically, go back to 97, 98, 99, kind of the salad days, right? The percentage of the budget that was contributed by the electric utility was up in the high 20s. So 27, 28, 29%. And then, of course, we had a period where we got stuck with some contracts and basically everything went to zero. I mean, it's an exaggeration for a point, but things did deteriorate. So, the Budget Committee did suggest attempting to have at least 50% of your revenue coming from property taxes. And this year we are, with the 1.5, it goes up, I think, by about 1.5%, oddly enough. So you go from like 46 to 47.5 as a proportion. But it's still aspirational, and I think if we were to get to 50-something%, then there'd be less reliance on electric. You'd have a more sustainable revenue source, but nevertheless, Rob's right. You can't, you're not going to be able to do this indefinitely without finding other sources of revenue and/or decreasing your services, which I don't think anyone wants to do.
And certainly, as I said a couple of times, is we need to spend more time on the recommendations, and so we're not a year from now saying, based on the recommendations, this is where we are, but the council hasn't said we agree with those recommendations, and our path will be. So we need to do that in the near future. Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked to Ben about this when I realized how late the presentations were going to be, because I realized that it was going to be difficult at that point to reshape the budget in any dramatic way, because I'm sure Ray and Jim and Robert have been working on this since the fall. So it's more what we should be looking at for next year. And, as much as I'd like to go back to 2 decades ago or whatever, I still think that what we saw 7 or 8 years ago, really opened my eyes, at least personally, in terms of what I think can go wrong when we rely too much on the electric utility. And although we're probably in a better place now because of the way we're purchasing electricity, it is still the type of thing that can go up or down very rapidly on us. And I don't want to see services endangered because times changed and we're stuck with a situation where we just saw a couple $1 million evaporate one year.
Bob?
I'll just go back to what I said in my opening statement. And a lot of it mirrors what Ben and what I've heard in the room is this. We are in a catch-up year. There's no question about that. If we had been doing things properly all along and spending all along, we would be in a different position right now. That's number one. Number two, in a catch-up year, when you're in catch-up mode, you may have to spend a little bit more or go outside the guidelines a little bit more than you'd prefer. But the key here is this. The recommendations were made. Are we terribly out of whack? No, we're not. Are we closing in on them? Yeah, we are. And that's what we're working toward. So I agree with what I've heard. Next year, I'd like to say that we're within the guidelines. But in my mind, we're accomplishing a lot. We are getting to where we need to be. We're getting the work done that needs to be done with our infrastructure. And hopefully within a year or two, it may not be next year, maybe the year after, we'll be in a position to be right smack dab at the midpoint of all those guidelines.
Okay, for,
Real fast. Just two observations on the electric.
I lost my thought now.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Two observations on the electric rate discussion. One is that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we have an ordinance on tonight with the targeted electric rebate program for 2015, making that a permanent program. And for those people who participate, which were 354 of our targeted most needy utility users, that's a 10.89% decrease or rebate in their electric bill. So that's significant, and that's funded in this proposal. The second is news today that in terms of why we need the flexibility for revenue is, for those who follow the news, the court decided today that the governor has to put probably into his budget address tomorrow, $1.8 billion back into the pension system was announced today. So we assume, and the governor was on 101.5 this evening, indicating that if that happens, he's going to appeal it to the Supreme Court, which I guess is underway, but that if he loses that appeal, he's going to eliminate state aid. That's $808,000 to the Borough of Madison. That's kind of one of the issues we talked about last budget hearing. Unfortunately, it may become a reality, so that's why we need the flexibility to react to something like that. If that comes out, it would be a catastrophic hit to the budget to lose $808,000 in one calendar year for us. And that's a real possibility.
And certainly for many communities not as well managed as Madison, it will be truly catastrophic to deal with. All right, so if there's, what we could do right at this point is entertain a motion that would be to direct Robert Califoot as CFO to work with the auditor to prepare the budget as presented for introduction on March 9th.
I'll move it. Second it.
Council discussion? Roll call vote?
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
All right. Robert, as I always say this time of year, you have your marching orders. Your final marching orders on a budget. Yeah. All right, ordinances for hearing. May the clerk please read the statement.
Okay, ordinances 4, 5, and 6, scheduled for hearing tonight, were introduced by title and passed on first reading at the council meeting of Monday, January the 26th. Ordinance 7, 2015, was introduced and passed at first reading on February the 9th. All were posted and filed according to law, and copies were made available to the general public requesting same.
I call up ordinances for second reading and ask the clerk to read said ordinances by title.
Ordinance 4, 2014, ordinance of the Borough of Madison amending Chapter 75 of the Borough Code entitled Building Construction to increase fire subcode fees.
Is there anyone wishing to comment on ordinance 4, 2015? Please step forward. Seeing none, I close the hearing.
Mr. Mayor, I move ordinance 4-2015.
Second.
Council discussion. Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
I declare ordinance 4, 2015 adopted and finally passed and ask the ordinance published notice thereof in the newspaper, and file the ordinance in accordance with the law.
Ordinance 5, 2015, an ordinance of the Borough of Madison amending Chapter 94 of the Borough Code entitled Electric Utility Appendix B to expand reconnection fee.
I open the hearing for ordinance 5. Anyone wishing to comment, please step forward. Seeing none, I close the hearing.
Mayor, I move ordinance 5-2015.
Mr. Mayor, I second that motion.
Any council discussion? Roll call vote.
Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
I declare ordinance 5, 2015 adopted and finally passed, and ask the clerk to publish notice thereof in the newspaper and file the ordinance in accordance with the law.
Ordinance 6, 2015 is an ordinance of the Borough of Madison amending Chapter 94 of the Borough Code entitled Electric Utility to amend the rules and regulations of the Electric Utility Department and set forth requirements to establish rebate credit program.
I open the hearing on ordinance 6, 2015. Anyone wishing to comment, please step forward. Seeing none, I close the hearing.
Mayor, I move ordinance 6-2015.
Mr. Mayor, I second that.
Any council discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
I declare ordinance 6, 2015 adopted and finally passed, and ask the clerk to publish notice thereof in the newspaper and file the ordinance in accordance with the law.
Ordinance 7, 2015, ordinance of the Borough of Madison amending Chapter 185-29 of the Borough Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic to prohibit parking on portions of Oak Court.
I open the hearing. Anyone wishing to comment on ordinance 7, please step forward. Seeing none, I close the hearing.
Mr. Mayor, I move ordinance 7-2015.
I second.
Council discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
I declare ordinance 7, 2015 adopted and finally passed, and ask the clerk to publish notice thereof in the newspaper and file the ordinance in accordance with the law. And now we are on to our second invitation of discussion from the public. You may comment on anything. Again, please step to the lectern, state your name, your address, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Anyone wishing to comment? Seeing none, I close this part of the meeting, and we move on to introduction of ordinances.
Ordinance scheduled for first reading has a hearing date set for March the 9th, 2015. It will be posted and published in the Madison Eagle, posted on the bulletin board, and made available to members of the public requesting copies.
Call up ordinance 8, 2015.
Mayor, I move ordinance 8-2015.
We got to get the title in there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Ordinance of the Borough of Madison establishing Chapter 137 of the Borough Code to establish policies and procedures for the Recreation Department of the Borough of Madison.
Mayor, I move ordinance 8-2015.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
I have the statement on consent agenda resolutions.
Consent agenda resolutions will be enacted with a single motion. Any resolution requiring expenditure is supported by a certification of availability of funds. Any resolution requiring discussion will be removed from the consent agenda. All resolutions will be reflected in full in the minutes.
Mayor, I move R 76-2015 to R 83-2015.
I second.
Council discussion? A roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes to all, but I'll abstain from R 82.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
And Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
All right, there is no unfinished business. Approval of vouchers.
Public Safety, $32,901.54. Health and Public Assistance, $2,016.54. Public Works and Engineering, $80,470.64. Community Affairs, $144. Finance and Borough Clerk, $64,271.93. Utilities, $504,039.13. Total $683,843.78.
Mayor, I move approval of vouchers.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
All right, I wish to make the following appointments and request council confirmation for Madison Alliance addressing substance abuse, Tricia Armstrong as Tori J. Sabatini rep. And then for the MRC Master Plan Advisory Committee through December 31st, 2015. The appointment for Tricia Armstrong is through December 31st, 2017. These are all through December 31st, 2015. Robert Landrigan, Chair, Austria Bailey, Ben Wilkowitz, Council Members, Stephen Stockert, Kathy Coltis, Sandy Fiallo, Kay Leary, Bob McDowell, Charles Courtney, Betsy Ullman, Lisa Ellis, Maureen Byrne, Jean Krakovia, Sandy Kalikowski, and Dave Carver.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, roll call vote.
Mr. Catalonello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes. I move we adjourn.
Second and all that. All right.
Dead tree.
Thank you. Well done, everyone.
What's that?
I just don't get it.
Why? Why?
Why resolution review?
You know what? Too much.